Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with another ranking video, and I went for my collection. I pulled out all of my indie eyeshadow palettes and I wanted to rank them for you to show you which one is my favorite and which one is my least favorite and everything in between. I did kind of go back and forth a little bit of what I consider an indie palette, because I feel like technically more palettes in my collection are like indie brands, because obviously an indie brand is something that is independently owned. So I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe even Natasha Nona is an independent brand. Maybe they're not anymore, but I believe they used to be, at least. Maybe they still are. But I know, for example, like Beauty Bay is also like independently owned brand. So, you know, all of that should have potentially been in this video. But for me, I consider an indie palette more of an independent, like small business kind of brand. So that kind of qualified a lot of the palettes in here. I don't know. Let me know if you think any of these should have not been included in this video, or just any other brands that you thought I should have included. But yeah, indie brands is a little bit of a gray zone, but for me, these are the palettes in my collection that I consider indie palettes. And I have 14 of them, so it's going to be quite a few. So I'm going to jump straight into the video, but before I do so, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So we're going to start with palette number 14, and this is actually the one that I feel like I was going back and forth with the most, if I consider this an indie palette or not. But I decided to keep it in here because I feel like this is an independent brand, and it's like something that I consider as an indie palette, because I think you can only purchase this one online as well, which is another kind of criteria in my head, at least, of what an indie palette is. But that is this palette right here, which is the Luna Beauty Eternal Eclipse palette. And this is a really nice palette. I actually have a feeling that when I started using this one a bit more, I haven't used this one in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project this year yet, but I have a feeling when I use this one might come up higher than I expect. But when I first look at this one, this palette has a lot of deeper shades, which is something that I don't really reach for that often, especially right now. I mean, today I'm wearing something that could have, I guess, been done with this palette. Actually, no, the blues are a bit deeper, but normally I don't go for very deep shadows. However, like the middle row is really beautiful, and some of the top shades are very, very unique and stunning too. But overall, I just feel like it's not the type of tones I go for. It's also very cool tone. There are also more rosy tones, but overall this is quite a cool tone palette and quite a deep palette, which is not something, again, that I reach for too often. So this one comes in last place at 14th. So yeah, that is the first palette. Let's move on to place number 13. And in 13th place, we actually have a palette that I really adore, and I probably would have scored this way higher if we did this ranking 1 year ago. But I used to have changed my preferences a little bit. I think right now I used to go for much softer looks. I go for more kind of rosier tones, things like that. So this palette is just not my preference right now, but I know that I really, really cherish this palette a lot when I first got it. And like, again, maybe a year ago. And that is the Mountain Trail palette from Sydney Grace. This one is a beautiful kind of yellow toned and green kind of palette. It's really, really stunning, and I have said before that I wear these kind of shades as neutrals. Again, I'm not as into them right now as I used to be, and that's fine. I'm definitely going to come back to them at some point. I feel like makeup preferences goes in waves. So I know that I'm definitely going to get more use out of this palette again in the future at some point. But right now, it's just not what I'm drawn to. Maybe when autumn even comes around, I might be drawn to these shades again, because for me, this is a very autumnal palette. And it just kind of shows how much I love my indie palettes, because this palette, even though it's second to last, it's not a palette that I don't like. It's not a palette in my collection that I see as like, oh, on the bottom end of my palettes. I see this one as a really, really highly ranked palette, which I think I do with most of my indie palettes, which is again why this one comes a little bit lower. But yeah, this palette is stunning. I really do love it, but unfortunately it's not my preference right now, so it comes in 13th place. So I'm going to reiterate that the rest of the palettes I do really, really like. Some of them I absolutely really love as well, but none of the palettes really, apart from maybe Luna Beauty, is on the shopping block or even like at a bottom end of my collection, like I said. So the rest of them are really highly ranked. But in place number 12, we have this palette right here, which is the Hella palette from Oden's Eye, and this one's collaboration with Angelica. Angelica Nyqvist. So this is what the palette looks like. It is a stunning palette. I really do love it. And again, we have these greens right here, but these greens are a little bit kind of lighter, not as deep. They're also a bit more kind of vibrant, I would say. They have like that yellowy undertone, which is my favorite type of green. I mean, the Mountain Trail palette also has like that yellowy undertone, but it's just like a little bit murkier, which again is also something that I'm drawn to right now. On top of that, this palette also has some like pink shades, which is again something that I really like today. And this shade Hella is this shade here, Hella, is definitely something that I'm really drawn to at the moment. It also has some beautiful shades on the bottom row, so it's a really nice, stunning palette. But the reason why this one isn't coming in higher is again because of my current preferences, because I'm not really going for super bright looks at the moment, or I'm not drawn to them again. And I think if I was, this one would rank much, much higher. And again, I'm sure that I will come back to them at some point. But right now, I want to go for like softer looks. And again, this one doesn't really give too many soft looks. So that's why I'm ranking this one in at 12th place. We're moving on to place number 11, and we have another Odin's Eye palette. This one is the Red Dragon palette in collaboration with Judy. So it's another collaboration palette. And this one looks like this. It is a really stunning color story. And I've said before that this is definitely like me in a palette. Again, maybe not so much anymore because it's not the tones that I go for, but honestly, I do really like this palette a lot still. So it has those like, again, warm tone greens and like the kind of mustard undertones, again, which is something that I love. And I'm gonna sound like a broken record because I said it now about 3 palettes back to back. But on top of that, it has some more variation because it has these kind of more neutral tones, more reddy tones. You also have this beautiful multichrome right here that goes from pink to green. And then also like some more kind of duochrome shimmery shades. It's a really pretty palette, but it's just not unique or special enough for me to be ranked any higher. So yeah, this one comes in place number 11. So it's the last one before we move into the top 10. And for place number 10, we do have another Odin's Eye palette, and this one is the Hey Reindeer palette. So this is one of their Christmas releases, and this one looks like this on the inside. I really, really, really like this palette quite a bit. We're coming into palettes now that I do adore. I would say that this one is like a pastel-y kind of color story, but it has like unique undertones. I feel like a lot of pastel palettes are, I don't know, more green or yellow or like, I don't know, the undertone, but this one is just like a bit more unique. It's a bit more like this blue, for example, is more muted. I don't know what it's about it. It's just like a muted pastel palette, which I really do like. And it's very unique, and the shimmers in here are absolutely stunning. It has one of my favorite shimmers in it called Candy Canes. It's like a pink to kind of gold. I don't know if you can pick that up at all, the like shift. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful shadow. It's super shiny. And yeah, it's an amazing palette. I do really like it. It's my least favorite out of the Christmas releases that I've tried yet. I do have a palette coming in that I've ranked higher, but I haven't actually used that one yet. So it's more just from like looking at the color story. So I'm not sure once I use it if I'm actually gonna like that one more. Of course, any ranking video that I do is kind of like ranking them at that point in time. So, you know, things might always change. Like if I did another ranking video in a month or two, this ranking might have even been different. It's just how I feel in this moment. But yes, overall, this is a really, really well-made palette, and I do love it, and I'm so happy that I have it in my collection. So this one comes in place number 10. So we're moving away from Odin's Eye for a little bit, and we're going into Kaleidos. And this one here is my Sashimi City palette, which is a 6-pan palette. It's one that is definitely more up my alley right now. So again, I said I like those kind of rosy, softer tones, and this palette is exactly that. I do love this palette. I originally thought I was going to rank this one higher, and I used this one recently in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project, and I do love it still. It's such an easy palette for me. I can do some really beautiful looks, and I don't have to think about it. The reason why I don't think it's ranking much higher is because there is a little bit of limitation with what you can do with the palette. It's not the most versatile one, but it's like definitely like a no-brainer palette for me. It's definitely one that I love having in my collection, and I love getting use out of. And if I just want to have like a simple eye look, I reach for this palette. It's stunning. It's my type of tones. It's just something about these undertones. I don't know if they like have like a white base, or they're just like soft. And I never am able to describe them, but I love this palette very much. So this one comes in place 9. For palette number 8, we have this palette right here, which is my Deep Sea Treasures palette from Cleona. This is a palette full filled up in multi-chromes, and I recently actually had this one rolled into my deck of panning where I wanted to reach for this one, No Pan Left Behind, and I did. And it's a stunning palette. It's only coming in 8th place, but I reckon the reason why it's not coming in higher is because it doesn't have any matte. It's more like a palette with singles rather than a full color story. I can only reach for like one shade. Well, I could reach for more, I guess, but really with multi-chromes like these, you can reach for like 1 or 2 shades max in like a look. So it's not like, again, as versatile, but I love having this in my collection. The multi-chromes in here are absolutely stunning. There's have some of my favorite kind of shades. The shade Cephalopod, is that how I say it? Cephalopod, I think so. This one is like one of my favorite shades ever. Ring of Fire is also stunning, and then Saltwater Pearl here is also amazing. So these 3 shades I absolutely love. And then looking at like shades like Fool's Gold is another shade that I absolutely love. Again, I'm not into those greens as much as I used to be right now, but I know that's going to change, and that is exactly up my alley. So this one has so many shades that I love. The only shade that I'm not like the biggest fan of really is Scuba, because it's not as shifty as some of the other shades. I guess also Shipwreck is a little bit deep, but I like using that one outer corner as like a deepening up shade that is a little bit more of a unique tone, because it is like black when you look at it straight on, but it goes into like a, almost like a, it goes into like a fiery red orange, and I think it also has some purple at certain angles. So it's a very unique shade, and this palette is very unique, and I absolutely love it. It comes in place number 8. All right, so we're in place number 7, and we have this palette next, which is from Cindy Grace, and this is the California Coast palette, which is a beautiful, beautiful palette. Again, this one is those kind of softer type of undertones, like this shade here. It's exactly like the shades I love, the ones I can't describe. And this palette does go a little bit deeper with the shimmers on the bottom. However, these shades right here are some of my favorite type of shadows, and with these 3 on the top, I can make a beautiful everyday look. If I want to go a bit smokier, I can with those deeper shades. I can also stay more cool tone with this. And this shade here, even though it's more of a cool tone shade, it has that kind of rosy undertone, which is what I love. And those are my type of cool tone shades. So it has a lot of variety, and it's just a unique undertone to this palette. And I really do like it. It's, again, one that I ranked a bit higher than I thought, because when I used this one in my Big Fire Eyeshadow project, I made some looks that I absolutely loved. I made this like kind of all matte look, I believe it was, or at least mostly matte. No, I think it was all matte, which is something that I don't do too often, but I really love how that turned out. And what I did is I kind of did like a wing effect with like these deeper shades, and I kind of just built them on top of each other, and it created this beautiful, beautiful look that I absolutely fell in love with. And then again, it just has some more staple shades. So this one is one that I really do love, and it's a neutral palette with a twist, I would say. So this one here comes in place number 7. So in place number 6, we have another of the Odin's Eye Christmas release palettes, and this is the shade, or this palette, sorry, Snow Dream, which is the one that I have not yet used. However, I'm ranking this one relatively high, and it's because this color story is right up my alley. It has these kind of like sagey green undertoned shades, which I absolutely love. I love them. It's like similar to the Colourpop The Child palette, which again is one palette that I absolutely adore in my collection. So these have like similar undertones. Also, a lot of the shimmers in here are so dimensional, so sparkly. And a lot of the shades in here were in my favorite eyeshadows from A to Z, or like at least contenders for that. So a lot of them are super stunning. And I remember having in Celebrate, Hugs, I think Mary I even considered. So that's 3 for like my favorite shades in my collection. It also has this like shade Frankincense right here, which is a holographic shade. And it has some more absolutely amazing shimmers. So even though I haven't used this palette yet, I know there's a lot of shades in here that I absolutely adore. And I know that these are the type of shades that I like using. So I think just time will tell with this palette. I do also feel like these type of browns, like this one here, is super unique, and it's one that I think I'm really gonna love. You can make some like more neutral looks, you can make those green looks, you can make like a bright like red look, or you can just mix any of the colors in here. So I'm expecting to, when I reach for this palette, I'm absolutely gonna love the looks that I make. So even though I haven't, again, played with this palette yet, I'm ranking it relatively high because I'm expecting to love this one quite a bit. So we are now in my top 5, and for place number 5 we have another Odin's Eye palette. This one is the Elva palette, which is quite an oldie but a goodie. I absolutely love this palette. I picked this one up relatively late, so I mean, I've had this one for a while now. I actually put this one up at the same time as the Red Dragon palette, but how much? Maybe it's like 2 years ago now. I think it's 2 years ago. So I haven't had this palette for like that long. I mean, it's obviously not like a brand new palette or anything, but I know this palette has been around for a very long time. I absolutely love this palette because it just has a lot of variety to it, and the shimmers in here are super sparkly and very like piecey looking. I remember making a look with the shade Lilac all over my lid, and it was like such a beautiful wet looking shimmer shade. It is a little bit repetitive in some ways. Some of the shimmer shades are almost like dupe of each other's, which isn't my favorite, but I just love the variety. You can make some like sunset looks, you can make some more mauve looks. And when I first looked at this palette, I thought it was just going to be like a mauve tone, cool tone kind of palette, but it's definitely not. You do of course have those yellow tones, but you can mix those in, and this one here is a little bit more of a warmer brown. You have this one more kind of warm, rosier mauve tone here. It's still a mauve tone, but it's more warm. And again, if you mix these in here, the yellow tones, you can make some really beautiful sunset looks. So it is a lot of variety in this palette, and because of the shimmers being so sparkly and kind of what I'm going for right now, this palette ranks very high in place number 5. So we'll come to place number 4, and for that I am putting the Club Nebula palette from Kaleidos. This one here was also a collaboration with Angelica Nyqvist, same as the Hella palette, but I do like this palette more. It's the original palette that I had from collabs from her. I think it was also her original collab, and this is a really, really stunning palette. I love this one because it has some really unique kind of matte shades. Like it has these deeper matte shades, which I don't really go for deep shades, but these are still quite vibrant for being deep shades. However, it also has a lot of lighter shades, and this shade right here called Gravity, right? Yeah, Gravity is an absolutely beautiful shade. It's like an electric green, and again, it has a yellowy undertone, which is something that I love. So it's a favorite shade of mine. I really do adore it, and every time I open this palette, my eye is drawn to that shade. On top of that, you also have these beautiful kind of sparkly, slightly shifty shades. Like they're not the most shifty, but you do have like a few shiftier eyeshadows in here. The typical like indie shimmers where they're like quite sparkly and not so satiny. The only one that is a bit more satiny is the shade Nebula down here, but it's still a really nice shade. So it's a really unique color story. It's a really well thought out color story, and it also is like really high quality. So this is a palette that I absolutely adore, which is obviously why I'm ranking it quite high. So we have 3 more palettes to go, and for place number 3, we have another Odenside palette, and this is another Christmas release palette. This is the Merry Christmas palette, which was one of the original 2 palettes. We do have another one coming up, which I will talk about soon. But this palette looks like this. It has some kind of greener, like green top rows, some more kind of neutrals on the bottom with like some reds. And this is very much like a Christmas palette. It's red and green. Of course, there's like a bit more nuances in there. But overall, this is a really, really stunning palette. The shimmers in here are stunning. You can see that I have quite a few pans in here because this one was actually my Product Level Up level 4 palette. So I was able to hit 4 pans in here, and I got to play with this palette a lot. Again, those greens right here, like there is a little bit more cool tones like here. They're not like super cool tone greens, but you do also have these more like warm tone greens right in this corner, which again is what I absolutely adore. But I do love the variation of the greens, and you can also like mix and match them, and they don't really clash. They work really nicely together, which is something that I really appreciate. Again, you do have some beautiful, more neutral tones. The neutral tones in here though aren't like super neutral. The most neutral kind of matte that you have, for example, is the shade Gingerbread, which is a very orangey toned matte. So it's not like the most neutral palette, or like not, it's obviously not a neutral palette, but it's not like, it doesn't have the most options for neutral shades, but that's fine by me because I do really love the shades that are in here. And even though I said earlier that I go for more softer looks right now and not like super intense colorful shades, this palette is obviously colorful. However, the shimmers in here are very ethereal, and you can create that like kind of scatter shimmer effect, which is something that I always love. So this palette just has a lot of variation to it, and I do love this color story. I think again it's very thought out. There's not really anything in here that I would take out. When you first look at the palette, maybe like this pink looks very random, but these two compare very beautifully together. You can pair this one with like some of the contrasting shades as well. So, you know, there's not really any shade that I would take out. My least favorite shade is probably the orange shimmer down here because it's just not as impactful as the rest. But overall, Really stunning palette, and this one comes in place number 3. So again, we have 2 palettes to go, and between these two it was really, really hard to decide because I know I love these palettes both, and I'm still going back and forth. But what I have decided to do is put this palette in second place, which is the Christmas Eve palette from Odensai. So it's the last one of the Christmas releases. It's another one of those original 2, and this palette is so beautiful to me. Originally, it wasn't like, I mean, to be fair, when this first came out, I was thinking about picking this one up more than the other palette, simply because this one is more unique to my collection, and I was like, I don't need more kind of warm tone greens, which the other palettes have, and that's kind of mainly what I saw and what I knew that I would like from that palette. So this palette just intrigued me, but I also thought that this one would be one that I would like having in my collection, but it wouldn't be like an absolute favorite because I don't reach for blue palettes very often. That's what I thought. But this palette really isn't like a blue palette. I think the background throws me off, as well as some of the kind of pops in here, because there's a lot more than blues in here. You have yellow tones, you have greens, you have mauves, you have purples, you have more kind of, I don't know, like mustardy shades. There's just like a lot in here. You have a grey as well. There's so many options in this palette, and I absolutely love reaching for this palette. When I had it in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project, which was very early in the year, it just blew me away. I did not want to put this palette down when I had done the 3 looks. I think I did a 4th look as well in my own time. You can make like some really beautiful, like just simple 2 shadow looks, like a matte and a shimmer on the lid. You can make some really intricate, colorful, unique looks. You can make some like contrasting looks. There's just so many options in here. I love this palette, and it's very, again, well thought out. The shimmer formula as well is super, super stunning. It is that beautiful Odensai kind of sparkly formula, and yeah, I'm really, really happily surprised with this palette. I'm so happy that I have it in my collection. I picked all of these Christmas release palettes up at their restock last November, I think it was. So I haven't had these palettes in my collection for very long, but I'm so happy that I picked up all 4 of these at that time, because I do really love all 4. The original 2 are obviously my favorite out of the 4. But I'm still happy that I picked up the other 2 too. But yeah, this palette is absolutely stunning, and I know that it's not available anymore, but if it ever comes back again for Christmas, I recommend it 1000%. This is such a beautiful palette, and I am so happy that I have it in my collection. So we have come to the final palette, and if you know my collection, you might not already know what palette comes in first place. But for place number 1, we have my Tiny Marvels palette from Sydney Grace. And this is also perfect timing for the Christmas in July sale, which is coming up, I think, in a week from posting the studio. I think it's going up next Monday. When it's going live, it has they have deal going for the whole week. So if you're interested in this palette, maybe pick it up then, because it will probably be put together with other deals. You might get some freebies or a discount on it. But overall, this palette is one of my favorites in my collection. To be fair, some of like the last 3 palettes I've talked about, like they are all up there, some of my absolute favorite palettes in my collection. But this one really is. Like this one though and the Christmas Eve palette are both very, very high up there, and now, again, I was going back and forth between those 2 quite a bit, but ultimately I decided to let this one win, because this one is just such a unique color story again, and it is those kind of softer undertones which I really like. It does have some colorful kind of undertone shade. You have like a purple, a green, a kind of purpley mauve, a peach, and then you have like some more kind of colorful shimmers. And even though it has those kind of colorful undertones, they are still very soft and wearable, and I absolutely love this. And it's such a unique, again, color story. I think Mel Thompson did an amazing job. By the way, this is our collaboration with Mel Thompson, which unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, which is very, very sad. But she did an amazing job with this palette, because it is an amazing palette. I think a lot of people love this one, and there's just a lot of variety to it. It's another kind of, I don't have to think about it palette, even though you would think that making some of these kind of combinations, like putting together some of these like kind of different colorful undertones, like a green and a purple and a peach, all of those kind of things, even thinking about like putting those together should be quite difficult. Maybe they go muddy, things like that. But I think because they all are a bit softer and have that kind of muted undertone, like muted but still light undertone, they just work perfectly together. So it's a bit of a non-brainer palette for me. You do, again, have those options for more kind of pastel, colorful look, but you can also make some neutral looks. You have a really, really beautiful duochrome here, like a blue-brown pigment called Scarab. You also have Firebuzz, which is one of my favorite shades. And this palette here also has the best of the best quality. Sydney Grace overall has really amazing quality, but this palette here takes the cake. It's the best quality that I've tried for Sydney Grace. All of the singles are very, very good. There's been like a few shades that are a little bit like harder to blend and build up, but overall they have an amazing formula, and this palette is just the best of the best. So again, it's a palette that I definitely recommend. If you've been eyeing this one up, maybe check it out during the Christmas and July sale, because I know this palette is very well loved by a lot of people, me included. So do recommend it 1000%. Of course, if you don't like, if you weren't thinking about it, maybe don't pick it up, because maybe then it's not for you. But if you have been eyeing it up, I do 100% recommend it. So yeah, check it out maybe next week when it's up for the Christmas and July sale. I hope they have this one in stock at least. But this palette here is my favorite out of my indie eyeshadow palettes. So those are going to be all the palettes today. Again, those were the 14. Let me know if you're shocked by any of the rankings. Did you expect anything else to win? Did you expect anything to rank higher or lower? Anything like that, let me know down below. But I hope you guys are having an amazing day wherever you are, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye guys!